Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for another It's Learning webinar, this time on battling bad weather, strategies for ensuring continuity of learning. My name is Jill Davis. I'm a marketing manager at It's Learning, and I will be moderating today's presentation. I want to thank those of you who submitted questions prior to today's webinar. We hope to get to most, if not all of them, during the last few minutes of the webinar. I also want to point out a few features of the webinar platform. You will see a blue comment icon and a blue document icon at the bottom right of your screen. You may submit questions with the blue comment icon, and those will be answered following the webinar. The document icon gives you access to handouts for the webinar. You'll find a case study on Forsyth County Public Schools and an additional document that will give you more information on how your district can ensure continuity of learning during bad weather. To participate in the live conversation during this webinar, please join us on Twitter by including the hashtag #WinterIsComing in your tweet. I would now like to introduce our speaker. Rachel Riggio spent over 20 years as a teacher and district administrator before coming to It's Learning. As Senior Project Manager, Team Lead for It's Learning, Rachel works with district administrators to implement all parts of the project plan, including but not limited to integration, curriculum migration, professional development, and content integration. She is focused on providing quality customer service and the necessary resources for optimal utilization of the platform. Let's hear from Rachel about how and why districts across the U.S. are looking for innovative ways to battle bad weather disruptions.
Good afternoon, everyone. At this time of year in many districts, inclement weather days are on everyone's mind, from the district level folks down to the administrators and teachers in the classroom, as well as the students and parents. So making a really strong plan for dealing with these inclement weather days is really important, because it can affect a lot of things. It can affect scheduling of instructional time, maximizing instructional time, and making sure that the students are getting everything they need for the standards that they have to learn, you know, for their everyday work, but also for that end-of-year testing that looms in the distance every spring. So it's important for all those districts to maximize the time that those students are in class learning what they need to learn. Also particularly important for the special populations, from your struggling learners even to your gifted populations, where disruptions in the schedule or change really impacts their ability to learn. So in this webinar, hopefully I'll give you some insight on, you know, what to think about when developing the plans for inclement weather days. So I love the name of this slide, Drafting a Battle Plan, because that's really what it is when we're battling this bad weather that comes through. And sometimes it's a one-day disruption. Sometimes, you know, in the district I live in, we had a 5-day weather disruption. So it can go from a minimal impact to a very large impact on instruction. So we think about, how can districts plan for this? Well, in the district that I have worked with especially closely, which I'll talk about a little bit later, they really went about it very systematically, first bringing together a committee or a task force, if you will, of folks from different areas, everything from technology to curriculum to student support, to make sure that everybody was involved in creating this plan of how we're going to battle this bad weather. The planning does look different depending on what level you're looking at. So at the district level, of course, we're looking from the big picture. I guess you would call it the 30,000-foot view. What infrastructure needs to be in place to make this happen? What do the schools need to know? Down to the teachers, what do they need to know? Hey, what do even the students and parents need to know? Because that communication is very important. When you get to the building level and the classroom level, you get more in the weeds a little bit. What do the teachers have to be doing to make those engaging, robust lessons for the students, that they're not seeing any gaps in their instructional time? And this communication to parents, it needs to be communicated clearly and often. Parents really need to know what's coming, all the way up until the moment that it's happening. Even some dry runs of communication I've seen happen. This is what it's going to look like on that inclement weather day, so people aren't taken by surprise. And then, of course, as part of your plan, we need training for the teachers, and even I would argue for the students as well. So when a teacher is in a brick and mortar classroom, it looks very different than maybe when they're conducting a lesson virtually. So for districts that have gone to these virtual learning days instead of losing school days, the teachers have to think a little bit more about what does this lesson look like that it can engage a student and maximize that time that the student has and still keep them on that path that the teacher wanted them on. And then the teacher needs to work with the students a little bit beforehand. This is what you're going to see. This is how you're going to deal with it. This is how you can communicate with me and with each other while you're at home doing this work. You also have to think a lot about, if you're going to these virtual learning days, your equity and access. What does it look like for the students? Do they have access to mobile devices such as phones and tablets? Are they working on desktops and laptops? Do they have the Wi-Fi access, or do they need to go somewhere to get Wi-Fi access? So those are all kinds of things that you need to think about. And think about the plans in place to deal with that. Maybe if we have one day off from the bad weather, we need to tack on a few more days for students to get these assignments accomplished so they can go off to somewhere there is a Wi-Fi or share with a neighbor or something like that. And then that leads me right into the role that technology plays. It plays a very large role in being able to make something like this happen, students and teachers having the devices they need and the access they need to be able to accomplish the tasks on a virtual learning day. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of the battle plan that a district needs to make one of these days happen. So the district that I worked with and that my own children have the good fortune of going to school in is Forsyth County, Georgia. And Forsyth County, Georgia is a good-sized school district with about 40,000 students. There are parts of it that are affluent and parts of it that folks struggle a bit, in the economic vein. Typically, most students do have access to devices, but there are a certain population that do not. What Forsyth did was make sure that students, if they don't have a device, can access a device to take one home, but also can access personal Wi-Fi to also have that at home. So Forsyth has done a lot of legwork on giving students, teachers, parents that access that they need. As far as weather goes, typically Forsyth County gets the black ice, which is very difficult to drive on, so schools are closed absolutely if there is black ice on the ground, and we do get some snow as well. And some of our inclement weather days can go from a one-day disruption all the way up to a full week of disruption based on what's happening with the snow or the ice. So Forsyth worked for quite a while on trying to make these virtual learning days happen. So I think they probably started about a year out from when they really wanted to start implementing something such as this. So they would have time to get all of those players together that I mentioned, those curriculum folks, those student support folks, those technology folks, everybody that needed to talk about this, they needed to get together. They decided for the first year to go ahead and letting the kids have their inclement weather days and being off of school. But then if there were days above and beyond those inclement weather days, the first year, those would be their virtual learning days, or the days that they used the learning management system. The next year was then a complete use of the learning management system for their virtual learning days, and they removed the inclement weather days from the calendar, so they didn't need to deal with those at all. We at It's Learning partnered with them throughout this whole timeline of getting this going, thinking through different scenarios, making sure the equity was there, the access was there, making sure the platform was ready to handle those thousands and thousands of children who would be accessing it on those days. And started off, the first year we only had to use it, I believe, once or twice. The second year they had some serious weather in Forsyth, so there were more days that they had to access it for the virtual learning days for sure. These days look different depending on, who you're talking to. For an administrator, the virtual learning day is still kind of a day where they're monitoring, they're watching what's going on, they're, popping in and out of virtual classrooms, if you will, to see what the teachers and students are up to. For teachers, it's become kind of a well-oiled machine in Forsyth County. The teachers know very early in the morning, usually by 5 or 6 a.m., that this is happening, and are required to have their lessons posted by 9 a.m. or 8 a.m. that day, especially for the elementary students. And they usually do so through our It's Learning planner. So the students access the planner and off they go on what they're supposed to do for that day. The parents are a part of the It's Learning community, so they know exactly what their students are up to for that day. Everybody knows that the students don't necessarily have to do it absolutely that day, that they do usually have an additional amount of days to do it. Should, they lose power or should they not have access that day, they certainly can make it up. And then by the time that last day has occurred, then the teachers will talk through any specific situations of students who haven't, quote unquote, attended those virtual learning days. And it's really become quite a seamless process now because of the good forethought and the planning and being able to use the learning management system in that way. So what makes a lot of this possible, too, these virtual learning days, is the ability to use the mobile app from It's Learning. And our mobile app team has done quite a bit of work on making this app a really strong way for the students to interact with the system and with each other. So the students can get updates, they can get messages from their teachers or other students, they can access their course and content anytime, anywhere with their devices. And this really gives them that 24/7 access to the tasks that they have to complete, the homework that they have to complete. So it makes it pretty easy, at their fingertips to be able to do this work. I know my daughter, who attends middle school in Forsyth County, she's on her phone constantly, in It's Learning with her different classes, watching videos, completing quizzes and tasks, and she does the exact same thing when an inclement weather day occurs as well. So when we think about best practice with regard to planning and implementing something such as this, for me, in my experience, both as a project manager with It's Learning, trying to help a district plan for this, as well as watching my own students participate in these virtual learning days, I think best practice as far as planning goes for a district that's thinking about doing this is to really back it out and do some long-range planning well before you want to implement anything such as this, to really think through all the scenarios that are possible and everything that has to be done to ensure a seamless execution of that day. Because you really want everybody to feel like it was time well spent, the teachers, the students, the parents. And that's really what occurred in Forsyth County. Everybody thought it was time well spent, and it really prevented any gap in instruction, and that's really what it's about. So I think best practice is long-range planning, really getting everyone at the table, everybody that has to be a part of this to plan and execute a really meaningful day of instruction. And as far as implementing them is really planning well, executing well, but also gathering feedback. And that's something else that Forsyth County did successfully. They gathered feedback from administrators, from teachers, from students, from parents. After the first day, after the second day, what was good, what worked, what was a possible obstacle, what do we have to do a little bit better, and then the next year, they're tweaking and constantly making it to be really a well-oiled machine. So that planning, that forethought, that willingness to gain feedback are all things that just make that day time well spent. So when we think about winning this battle against bad weather, when I went back to Forsyth and I asked them, so what was, the feedback? What did people think? And it was overwhelmingly positive. Administrators would say, hey, I was able to conduct school. My teachers were able to deliver instruction to students. They were still able to communicate with students, so we didn't really feel like there was any gap in teaching and learning. And teachers said, hey, I'm planned well in advance. I have my information in the planner in its learning. I know what I want my students to do, so it's not too much of a stretch to get them ready to go on those virtual learning days. For students, they're kind of funny. We want to go and play outside, in the snow. But what's nice about the students is they can either choose that day to get it done, knock it all out, or they can choose to spread it over some time or do it a couple of days later. They do have that leeway to get things done, and they do have that communication still with their classmates and with teachers, so it's really like business as usual for them. And for the parents, and I can speak for myself as a parent, my students are able to get their work completed. They're not losing any time because they're out of school for 2-3 days and then having teachers trying to scramble to make it up. So they feel, and I feel it's just business as usual. They can get things done. I can still communicate with the teachers. I can still have my students, doing their work. So it's in a safe, kind of warm environment. So it's nice for everybody involved that we have this opportunity to do virtual learning days this way.
Great, thank you, Rachel, for your presentation. And I'd like to take some time now to address some of those questions that were submitted previously.
Sure.
We'd like to get to some of the questions specific around virtual learning days. So for example, there's a question from Rob, and he's wondering how a virtual learning day might differ for an elementary student versus a middle school or high school student.
That's actually a really good question, and it actually does differ. And that was one of actually the big questions from elementary parents when we thought about doing these virtual learning days. What does this look like for a kindergartner or a second grader? And what ended up happening was, for the little guys, it was more of an experiential type day. A teacher might have put up several interactive games for the students to play, to practice a concept or a skill. So it was more experience, whereas in middle and high school, not only were those students accessing videos or games or interactives, but they were also required to submit assignments or take quizzes or tests. So it was a little more accountability, I guess you would say, for the middle and high school students to actually deliver a product, whereas the elementary school students were really just experiencing, practicing, that sort of thing.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rachel. Let's take another question. This one is from Valerie. She is a special education teacher, and she wants to know what her role might be during a virtual learning day, and also how she might co-plan with the general ed teachers for this type of day.
Right. So what most of the teachers try to do is, as I said, kind of keep things business as usual. So if the special ed teachers typically plan with the regular ed teachers and they're in the same courses, then they would really do that same sort of thing on a virtual learning day, where their special population students would be doing that work that they would normally design for the school day. However, sometimes special ed teachers have courses of their own and create materials on their own for their students. So if that was the case on a virtual learning day, those students would have possibly some work from their special ed teachers coming their way. So when we plan for those days, especially at the district level, we always have somebody from student support talking on the committee and planning too. So we make sure that the special ed teachers and the students that they serve are well taken care of and included in all of the planning. So we're making sure we're meeting everyone's needs during these days.
Great, thank you. I have one more question. This one is from Dorothy, and she's asking how peer collaboration works during virtual learning days and if that's something that you would recommend.
Yeah, actually virtual learning days are perfect for peer collaboration, especially when you have a tool like It's Learning to do it, because students can message, students can start groups, students can do group assignments. So it's a nice way of allowing the kids to still work together even though they're not together, because you know, they're typically part of this classroom community. So these walls of the classroom get knocked down and they're still able to be part of that classroom community and collaborating outside of the classroom, and even with their teacher. They can even include the teacher in their discussions and their messaging in the work that they're doing. So I think it's a perfect opportunity for students to collaborate.
Great, thanks again. I also want to remind our audience that for any questions submitted during the course of the webinar, you will be receiving a follow-up after the webinar. I also want to thank you for participating in the live Twitter chat. Please feel free to continue submitting questions, comments, and thoughts using the hashtag #WinterIsComing. Thank you again, Rachel, for all of your insights into your work with Forsyth County Schools and an overview of virtual learning days. And to our audience, if you have further questions or would like more information, you can find more on itslearning.com. And that wraps it up for today. Thank you.
Thank you.